Today, I would like to reflect on the meaning of basic concepts in climate debates in order to reflect on the role and the position of the Homo eco-politicus in the, at least in the current, but also in the future post-Anthropocene world. And I can imagine that you ask yourself the question, why is this important? Because we are currently living in a climate crisis and we require action. So what is the relevance of philosophy and literature if we talk about these issues? Now, my assumption is that semantics is important to understand the meaning of the Anthropocene and also the meaning of the post-Anthropocene or the Symbiocene or whatever frame we use for it. And my hypothesis is that notions, basic concepts like world and earth are metaphysical categories that can inform the Homo eco-politicus and the transition that it envisions towards a post-Anthropocene world. Now, the question is, of course, what do we mean with metaphysics and a metaphysical understanding of the world? So let's start with this. And to this end, I would like to highlight the notion of global warming and to reflect a little bit on the notion of globality. What do we mean with the global in the notion of global warming? It is not about the facts, so new facts that emerge in the Anthropocene, for instance, or in times of global warming, like new raindrops, new storms, but it's much more about the meaning of these raindrops and storms as indicators of global warming. An easy example can make this clear. When I was young, at least when I was young, when I entered the market every Saturday morning with my grandfather and grandmother, they made all kinds of chats with the neighbors and other people from the community, and they were talking about the weather. And then, for instance, you have examples like it is rather hot for the time of the year, or it is rather rainy for the time of the year. And in those days, these type of indications were just chats. It was just about to talk about each other without a significant meaning. While if I today am on the market and I have a discussion with the neighbor about the rainy time of the year and say that it's too rainy for the time of the year, then we willingly or unwillingly refer to climate change and to global warming. It is an indicator, it is a symptom of a global phenomenon, namely global warming. So that shows that it's not about new rains or new facts in reality, but it's about the meaning. And here the entry point for philosophy and literature comes in, I would say. Also, the globality of the global warming is a global shift in the meaning of the climate. And it is such a shift that it's also that we as humans are included in it. Again, a simple example, when I was young, or even a few years ago, I was able to grab a cup of coffee, and then after drinking it, I throw it away. Or when I give a presentation like today, I make a copy, and after the presentation, I throw it away. I externalize the waste to the environment, and that was okay. While today, in times of global warming, we experience the globe as an interior sphere, an interior milieu, in which nothing comes out. So every strategy to externalize waste to the environment will return to the environment in terms of global warming and CO2 emissions, which will increase. So if we talk about the phenomenon of global warming that concerns the whole of being and not new beings, but the meaning of these beings, and in such a way that also human existence is included in this whole, then I would say we have to do with a new metaphysical phenomenon. How is this new phenomenon then characterized? And I'm sure that you are aware of the frame, the Anthropocene, which is normally used as an physical, an indication of a geological or physical epoch. It is a geological epoch that started at a certain moment in time, for instance, the Trinity test on the 16th of July 1945. But with reference to the previous point about globality as a metaphysical phenomenon, global Anthropocene can also be understood in a metaphysical way. It is a shift in the understanding of the world as a whole, in the transition from the Holocene, so the previous relatively warm and stable climate, to the Anthropocene, the relatively unstable climate that we experience today. Now, in order to understand the difference between, let's say, the Holocene and the Anthropocene, we can, for instance, refer to a difference in local categories in the Holocene. In the Holocene, we made distinctions between urban and rural, nature versus culture, Western, Eastern world, while today we live in a global categories in the Anthropocene. The world is one interior milieu in which humanity and the natural environment become completely intertwined. The natural environment becomes humanized and the humanity becomes naturalized. So that means, and that shows that the same object like a storm or a flood, appears as indicator of a local climate, like a country climate or a maritime climate in the Holocene, and of a global climate in the Anthropocene. Now, my fourth point is that the advantage of the metaphysical concept of world beyond what we call flat ontologies like posthumanists seem and often embrace, is that such a metaphysical understanding can help us to explain the difference between epochs, the difference between the Anthropocene world and the Holocene world, and also enables us to understand what the difference might be with the post-Anthropocene or Symbiocene or whatever frame we use will bring. How to make sense then of this difference between the Holocene and the Anthropocene if it's to be found on a metaphysical level and not based on physical entities or physical characteristics? And to this end, I introduce the concept of the Gestalt. I'm sure you have seen a picture like this. It is the same picture of something that can be interpreted or can be seen as a duck or as a hare. And if we want to understand the difference between the duck and the hare in the same picture, it doesn't make sense to look at the ears or the mouth or the beak of this animal, because it's the same object that appears in complete different ways. And it cannot be, this difference cannot be explained based on the figure or the form of the duck, because it's the same figure or the same form that informs the duck and the hare. It concerns, in other words, the semantic orientation or the meaning of the head that appears in complete different ways. And this perspective can help to understand also what happens with the switch or the transition from the Holocene to the Anthropocene world. It is not a shift in facts or in things in the world, but it's a shift in the appearance of the world and the way we experience this world. The new meaning of the world is that humanization of the nature and the naturalization of the human in the Anthropocene. Now, global warming does not only indicate the emergence of a new world, namely the Anthropocene world, because global warming disrupts at the same time this global interior milieu, the world, and confronts us with the Earth as an exterior milieu. And this exteriority or heterogeneity is indicated by the volatility and capricious nature of Earth that erupt and interrupt the stability of the world. So that means that the Anthropocene world as a global interior milieu remains embedded in and is susceptible of the interruption of the Earth as exterior milieu. Now, this gives us reason to think about our relation with this world, and that also and our understanding of this world and the role of human existence in this world. Because our experience of the embeddedness of the world in Earth disrupts our preconception of human living and acting in the world, and also in this regard, our understanding of this Homo eco politicus. I give just one example of one of my favorite philosophers, Martin Heidegger, who indicated that human existence is characterized by being towards death. That means in my life, in the present, I am always already anticipating my future death, and this future death is determining my living and acting in the world in the present. For instance, because I'm rude or I'm anxious or whatever I am, and this futurality of my future death constitute the singularity of the self, is the argument. And there's an interest in this self-interest, not egocentrism, but the singularity of the self in these type of philosophies. And then we can ask ourselves, this idea of the singularity, can this inform our concept of the Homo eco politicus in times of global warming, even if we accept that this has nothing to do with egocentrism or whatsoever. Maybe we can transpose the idea of the foresight of the individual death in the future, and the idea that it informs our understanding of what we have to do and what we do in the present, to inform a concept of world interest instead of self-interest. The foresight of the death of the world as life support system, which is experienced when humanity crosses the planetary boundaries, indicated, for instance, in the Rockström's work, that can inform human living and acting as the Homo eco politicus in the present. Maybe therefore we should talk about a shift from the interest in the self or the self-production of an authentic human existence to the production of a relatively stable world, like Clive Hamilton, for instance, would argue. And is this world interest in times of global warming then informing our understanding of the Homo eco politicus? Now, the problem is that if world production produces a world that serves the survival of human living and acting in the world, world interest serves the human self-interest and provides no access to their living on Earth as an exterior milieu. World production produces then human living and acting in the world in their struggle against the Earth as exterior milieu. And a clear example of this is, for instance, found in eco-modernism. The idea that we can innovate ourselves out of the crisis of the climate, and that we, with the human behind the steering wheel, we can save the planet. This is a type of interiorization or internalization of the exterior milieu of the Earth as a part of the management and control process, in which the world becomes a spaceship. That's the ideal of eco-modernism, that Mother Earth was not able to save her children, and her children have to take over control and have to steer the Earth as a spaceship to keep it safe. If the world is a spaceship, we can argue the Earth in which the world is embedded remains forgotten. So that means that world production is accompanied with Earth alienation. But rather than world production, therefore, we should engage in Earth interest as origin of each and every living and acting in the world. This Earth interest does not necessarily exclude world interest. Human existence is always already living and acting in a meaningful world, and therefore human living and acting in the world is embedded in human living on Earth, and vice versa, living on Earth is also dependent on living in the world. So that means that Earth interest is a dual interest in world and Earth, but this Earth interest doesn't require a world production. World is already given. Earth is already given. Earth is a prerequisite for the emergence of human beings on the Earth in the course of evolution. The Earth as a rock that moves in space emerged in Earth history and gave rise to the emergence of humans. But the Earth is, so that is the ontic or physical level prerequisite of the Earth. If there is no Earth, there's nothing to stand on. There is no human existence. But the Earth is also a prerequisite for the human intentional involvement in the world at a metaphysical level. Because in order to live and act in the world with others, like you in this meeting, we need an openness that brings us together. And this Earth is the prerequisite for our intentional involvement in the world. That means that human living and acting in the world emerges, unfolds, and expands out of the Earth in the era of humanity, and threatens to go back into the Earth at the end of this era. World emerges in Earth history as a new background condition, for instance called the Holocene, for instance making the transition towards the Anthropocene, and in the future to the post-Anthropocene. And in this constellation, world is relatively stable but finite, and it's rescendent in the sense that it's embedded in the Earth as a relatively unstable origin of the world. The Earth, as a Death Star in Earth history, gave rise to the human living and acting in the world, and this Earth is never exhausted by any actual world. It is not the case that we have to argue now for the relation between Earth and world, that the Earth produces this world, as Stenger, for instance, would argue. In Finn's first instance, we have to acknowledge that the Earth is completely indifferent towards the world. The Earth is not a Mother Earth. It is not a causal efficiency. There is not a material cause because it's not about material factuality, but it's about meaning. It's even not the case, like Heidegger would say, and I said that he's my favorite philosopher, but I disagree with him here. It is not the case that there is a negative interest to produce the world in order to withdraw itself, as an Heideggerian line of reasoning could go. World and earth are in an asymmetric relation. Earth is the non-causal ontological ground of the world. Now, how to understand, in order to understand this, we can refer again to the Gestalt psychologist or Gestalt theory. The Gestalt psychologist introduced a distinction between ground and figure to understand the difference between the meaning of, for instance, in this case, the face or the vase or the profile. Again, like in the previous picture, the figure is the same. The figure that delineates the vase and the profile is the same. So it cannot explain the difference between the profile and the vase. According to the Gestalt psychologist, it is the figure, it is the ground, the background that determines this difference. From the black background, the foreground appears as a vase, while from the white as background, the black on the forefront emerges as profile. So, based on the ground, there is an explanatory explanation for the difference between the vase and the profile. So that means also in our case, if we consider this and apply it in the context of earth and world, that we need a difference between world and earth to the extent that the earth provides the background condition that enables us to understand the difference in the foreground, namely the difference between the Anthropocene and the Holocene. If we lose sight of this difference and this acknowledgement of the earth, then we can see what happens. Because without the ground, the figure can only be understood from the black part as a vase. So that means that it becomes one-dimensional. So like the ground and the figure are necessary to understand the difference between the vase and the profile, we need earth and world to understand the Holocene and the Anthropocene, but also to say something reasonable about the possible future post-Anthropocene world. The transition from Holocene world, Anthropocene world, post-Anthropocene world requires an understanding of earth and world. The same figure of the world requires the earth as a ground to consider it as the possibility to make these shifts possible. So, how to conclude and what does it mean for climate action, what I just introduced to you? What I try to do in this lecture is to provide a conceptual distinction between world and earth that enables us to move beyond the interest of human interventions and consider the transition from the Anthropocene world to the post-Anthropocene world. And as humans, we are inclined to, and also the urgency of climate action pushes us towards action, while I hope I have shown it is important that philosophers and literature sciences are involved, and literature and art are involved in these debates with their disciplinary orientation on meaning constitution, because there's more at stake than just the need for climate action. It can also provide an understanding that moves beyond the productionist logic of world production, as if we are in control or should be in control. And the conceptualization of the Homo eco-politicus requires the acknowledgement of earth, figure, and ground to move beyond the one-dimensionality of the current world and to envision the post-Anthropocene world. Now, if you are interested in this topic, this lecture was based on the article that you can see here. It can be accessed, open access, and here is the reference to the article. And I would like to thank you for your attention, and especially also my team for all the inspiration that enables me to write and work on these type of topics. I thank you very much for your attention.